It wasn't a phone call. It was a voice note, 47 seconds long, and the timestamp said it was sent at 2:14 in the morning. I was on a supply vessel somewhere in the Beaufort Sea, about 300 kilometers north of Tuktoyaktuk, and the satellite connection had been cutting in and out for 2 days. The message had been sitting in my inbox for 6 hours before it finally loaded. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was my buddy from the crew sending me something stupid to pass the time. I pressed play. It was my son. His voice was barely above a whisper, and there was something in it, not just fear, but exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from crying so much. There's nothing left. Dad, if you get this, I'm in Uncle Garrett's basement, the one by the lake. I don't know what day it is. They took my tablet. Dad, please. I haven't eaten since, I don't know. I'm really cold. Then a long pause. I could hear him breathing. Mom said you weren't coming back this time? But I don't believe her. I don't believe her, Dad. And then the note ended. I sat on the edge of my bunk, and I did not move for 30 seconds. The vessel was pitching slowly in the dark water. Someone down the hall was laughing at something on their phone, and I was holding mine with both hands staring at my son's name on the screen, replaying those 47 seconds in my head, because part of me needed to be absolutely certain I had heard what I thought I heard. His name is Owen. He was 10 years old, and he was in a basement. I called the RCMP first, not 911. I wasn't sure which dispatcher would have jurisdiction from where I was, and I wasn't going to waste a single second being transferred. I looked up the non-emergency line for the detachment nearest my brother-in-law's property a year ago, when Owen had first started staying there on weekends just out of habit. Just because something about the whole arrangement had always sat wrong with me, and I never knew why until that moment. The constable I reached was calm. Too calm, I thought, but I reminded myself that calm was what I needed from her. I explained what I'd heard. I gave her the property address, 14 Birchwood Trail, about 40 minutes outside of Sudbury. I told her my son was 10 years old and that the voice note said he hadn't eaten. I told her I was on a vessel in the Beaufort Sea and I needed someone to go to that house immediately. She asked me if I had any reason to believe the child was in immediate danger. I said, a 47-second voice note of my son whispering from a basement at 2 in the morning counted as immediate danger in my books, yes. She said she'd dispatch a unit and that someone would call me back. I hung up and immediately called the company's operations coordinator to get me on the first possible transport off the platform. Helicopter to Inuvik, then whatever got me south fastest. He told me the earliest was 6 hours from then, a supply chopper heading back at 7 in the morning. 6 hours. I've done a lot of hard things in my life. I grew up in salt steinery, left at 18, worked offshore since I was 23. I've been through 2 equipment failures, 1 evacuation in a North Atlantic storm, and a marriage that ended badly enough that I don't talk about it much. But those 6 hours, sitting in a metal bunk in the Arctic, listening to my son's voice on a loop in my head, completely unable to do anything, were the hardest 6 hours I have ever lived through. Let me go back, because to understand what happened, you need to understand how we got there. My ex-wife's name is Colleen. We met in our late 20s, got married, had Owen, and by the time he was 4 years old, we both knew it wasn't working. The divorce was civil, mostly. We split custody. Owen spent weekdays with her, weekends with me, and we managed it without lawyers after the first year. I thought we were doing all right. I thought Owen was doing all right. What I didn't see, what I wasn't home enough to see, was how much time Owen was spending with Colleen's brother. His name's Garrett. Garrett Holt. He's 44, never married, owns a piece of land up near Ramsey Lake that he inherited from their father. He had a workshop out there, a dock, a little aluminum boat. Colleen used to take Owen there on long weekends, and Owen liked it. He liked fishing. He liked the space. He told me about it, and I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Garrett's wife. They'd been together for years before getting formally married. Is named Paulette. Quiet woman. I'd met her maybe 4 times total. She never said much. Looking back, I wonder what she knew. I wonder how long she'd known it. The problem started the previous September, about 8 months before that night on the vessel. Owen came home from a weekend at the lake house and he was different. Quieter. He didn't want to talk about the trip, which was unusual because he usually came back chattering about the fish he'd seen or some animal in the woods. I asked him if he'd had fun. He shrugged. I asked him if he'd had fun. He shrugged. I asked him if something had happened. He said no. I let it go. I shouldn't have. I let it go because I told myself kids have moods, kids have off weeks, and Owen had been going through a lot with the school transition. I told myself it was probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. By January, I'd noticed he didn't want to go to the lake house anymore. He didn't say it directly. He'd find reasons. Homework. A friend's birthday. A stomachache on Friday afternoon. I asked Colleen if she'd noticed anything, and she told me I was projecting. That Owen was fine. That he loved spending time with her brother and I needed to stop looking for problems that weren't there. I want to be fair to Colleen. I don't think she knew everything. But I also think she had decided a long time ago that her brother was not someone who could do harm, and that decision had made her blind to a lot of things. That March, I had a 3-week rotation offshore, Beaufort Sea, which meant limited communication. I'd arranged for Owen to stay with Colleen the whole time, and she'd said she might take him up to Garrett's for a week in the middle. I told her I wasn't sure about that. She told me I didn't have a say in where she took him during her custody time. Legally, she was right. I knew she was right, and I still can't forgive myself for leaving it there. The voice note came on a Thursday morning. My time. His time. I'm still not entirely sure he'd somehow gotten hold of an old smartwatch of mine that he'd found in the back of my desk drawer the last time he stayed at my place. It still had a SIM card in it, still connected to my plan. I hadn't thought about it in 2 years. He must have kept it without telling me. Must have hidden it somewhere, maybe knowing on some level that he might need it one day. That's the part that gets me. He was 10 years old, and he had the presence of mind to plan for the possibility that he might need help. When the constable called me back about 2 hours later, she told me a unit had done a welfare check on the property. She said they had spoken with Garrett Holt and his wife. She said the couple reported that Owen was visiting voluntarily, that he'd been given the basement as his own space because he'd asked for privacy, and that he was sleeping. She said everything appeared to be in order. I said, "My son does not sound like that when everything is in order." I said, "I want them to speak to him directly, not through the adults." I said, "He told me he hadn't eaten, and that he didn't know what day it was." There was a pause on the line. She said she would follow up. I called my sister next. She lives in Barry, about 2 hours from Sudbury. I told her what was happening and she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Tell me the address and I'll drive there right now." That's the kind of person she is. Her name's Bryn, and I've never been more grateful for her in my life than I was in that moment. Bryn drove to the property. She called me from the road, then from the driveway, then from the front step where Garrett answered the door and told her she had no business being there. She asked to see Owen. He said Owen was resting and didn't want to be disturbed. She said she wasn't leaving until she'd spoken to him. He said he'd call the police. She said, "Please do." While this was happening, I had made a second call to the RCMP. This time to a different detachment, explaining that a family member had attended the address and was also being refused access to the child. By the time Bryn had been standing on that front step for 25 minutes, a second unit arrived. This time, they asked to speak with Owen directly. They found him in the basement. He'd been down there for 6 days. I got the call from the constable as I was boarding the helicopter in Newvik. She told me Owen had been located, that he was being assessed by paramedics, and that 2 individuals had been taken in for questioning. She told me to call her when I landed in Edmonton. I don't remember much of the flight to Newvik. I remember the white, mostly. All that flat white stretching in every direction and the sky just barely getting light, and sitting there with my hands on my knees thinking about that voice. I don't believe her, Dad. In Edmonton, I sat in the airport for 3 hours, waiting for a connection to Toronto. I called the hospital in Sudbury and they told me Owen had been admitted and was stable. Mild hypothermia. Dehydration. A laceration on his left forearm that he'd gotten, he said, from trying to push open a small window. He was asking for me. I cried in a Tim Hortons in the Edmonton airport. I'm not embarrassed about it. A woman across from me saw and asked if I needed anything, and I said I just need to get home. And she said, "Well, you're almost there, hon." I don't know her name. I hope she knows she helped. I landed in Sudbury at 6:40 in the evening. My sister was at the airport. We didn't talk much on the drive to the hospital. I don't think either of us had the words yet. Owen was in a room on the second floor. He was small in that hospital bed. He had a drip in his arm and a bandage on his forearm, and he was watching something on the TV mounted on the wall. But he turned when I walked in, and his whole face changed. I sat on the edge of the bed and I held him for a long time. He cried. I cried. At some point, the nurse came in and then quietly left again. He told me everything, slowly, over the next 2 days. He said Garrett had started keeping him downstairs during the days early on in the trip. At first, he'd been told it was temporary, that there was something being fixed upstairs, that the adults needed quiet for a call. Then the reason stopped coming. The door started being locked from the outside. His tablet disappeared. Paulette brought food twice a day, then once a day, then not at all for stretches that Owen couldn't measure because he had no way to track time. He said he found the watch in the pocket of his hoodie. He'd taken it from my desk back in February, kept it because he thought it was cool, shoved it in that hoodie pocket and forgotten about it. When the basement door stopped opening as often, he remembered it was there. It still had charge. He waited until he thought everyone was asleep and he recorded the note and sent it to me. 47 seconds. The police arrested Garrett and Paulette 2 days after Owen was admitted to hospital. They were charged with forcible confinement, failure to provide the necessities of life, and criminal negligence causing bodily harm. Charges under the Criminal Code of Canada that carry serious prison time. Garrett's lawyer immediately began trying to frame it as a misunderstanding, a discipline matter. A child who had been difficult on the trip and had been given space to calm down. I will not repeat what I said when my own lawyer relayed that framing to me. It is not fit for polite company. Colleen came to the hospital. I let her see Owen because Owen asked me to, and because whatever I felt about her judgment, she was his mother. The conversation she and I had in the hallway outside his room was one of the hardest of my life. Not because we screamed at each other, we didn't. Because she kept saying she didn't know, she had no idea her brother was capable of this. And I had to decide what to do with that. I'm still deciding. What I know is that 2 weeks after Owen came home to my apartment in Toronto, I'd taken emergency custody for the interim period while the legal situation was being assessed. I found him sitting on the kitchen floor at midnight with the lights off. He wasn't crying. He was just sitting there. He said he did it sometimes because the basement had been dark, and being in the dark now felt safer than being somewhere bright and not being able to get out. That broke something open in me that I'm still trying to close. We got him a therapist the following week. She works outdoor practice near Rosedale, and Owen says she's okay, which from a 10-year-old is a significant endorsement. He goes twice a week. He's sleeping better. He still checks the locks on the doors before bed, front door, back door, his bedroom door, but the therapist says that's normal and will ease with time. The trial took 14 months. I won't walk through all of it, but I will tell you the parts that matter. Paulette pleaded guilty partway through. Her sentence was 22 months, with credit for time served and a period of probation. I thought it was too light. My lawyer reminded me that a guilty plea meant Owen didn't have to testify, and that I should count that as something. I do count it as something. I just also count the 22 months and think about the 6 days in that basement. Garrett went to trial. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal penitentiary, with eligibility for parole considered after he had served 2/3 of his sentence, meaning he would serve a minimum of 4 years before any parole board review. His lawyer appealed. The appeal was denied. Let me be clear about the math, because I know how these things can get confused in the telling. Paulette received a shorter sentence and will be released before Garrett. That is because she pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and the court found her culpability, while serious, to be lesser than his. The longer sentence, the slower path to release. That belongs to Garrett where it should. Something else happened during the trial that I haven't talked about publicly until now. Garrett's lawyer subpoenaed communications between Colleen and her brother going back 18 months. What came out in discovery, and this was deeply uncomfortable for everyone, was that Colleen had been sending her brother messages about Owen being out of control and needing structure. She had not instructed him to lock Owen in a basement. She had said things like, "He just needs someone to be firm, and maybe a week away from screens will sort him out." She did not know what that would become. The Crown did not charge Colleen. They considered it and decided the evidence didn't meet the threshold. I have my own feelings about that decision, but I also understand it. What I know is that she will live with those messages for the rest of her life. I don't need to add anything to that. A woman at Garrett's sentencing, someone I'd never met, approached me in the corridor afterward. She told me her nephew had spent time at Garrett's property 4 years earlier when Garrett had been in a previous relationship. She said there had been an incident. She said her sister had been offered money to sign something and had taken it because they needed the money at the time. She said she'd thought about coming forward for years and hadn't known how. I gave her my lawyer's card. I don't know what came of it. The statute of limitations on some of those older matters is complicated, and I am not a lawyer. But I know that woman walked into that courthouse carrying something heavy, and I hope giving her that card made it feel a little lighter. Owen is 12 now. He plays hockey on Saturday mornings in North York, and he is not very good at it, and he thinks it is the funniest thing in the world that he's not good at it. He laughs at himself on the ice, falls down, gets back up, keeps going. His therapist says he's doing remarkably well for everything he's been through. His teacher says he's one of the most empathetic kids in his class. Last spring, his class did a project on careers they found interesting. He chose Child Protective Services. He interviewed a cast worker over Zoom for the project, spent 45 minutes asking her questions, filled 3 pages of notes. When I read his write-up, I had to put it down halfway through and go stand in the kitchen for a minute. He wrote, "I think the most important thing a person can do is notice when someone can't ask for help out loud and find a way to help them anyway." He was 10 years old, alone in the basement with a watch and 47 seconds, and he found a way to ask. I try to be worthy of that every day. I keep coming back to a question I can't fully answer. What kind of person hides a watch in their hoodie pocket because some part of them, some quiet, careful part, already knows they might need it? Owen didn't plan what happened. He was 10. But somewhere in him, underneath the fear and the hunger and the darkness of that basement, there was something that didn't give up. He waited for the right moment. He kept his head clear enough to record 47 seconds and send them to the one person he trusted. That's not luck. That's character. And I don't think character like that comes from nowhere. I think it gets built slowly through every small moment where someone in a child's life shows them that their instincts matter, that they are worth believing, that asking for help is not weakness. I think about Garrett and I think about cause and consequence in the most straightforward sense there is, not fate, not karma in any mystical reading, just the plain truth that what we choose to do to the people around us eventually catches up with us. Garrett made a series of choices, each one compounding the last, and at the end of those choices was a 6-year sentence and a child who checks the locks on every door before he goes to sleep. There is no version of that story where Garrett's actions don't have a cost. The cost was just distributed in a way he didn't anticipate. Most of it landed on Owen and then the rest came back around. Paulette made different choices. She cooperated. She told the truth when it mattered. Her sentence reflected that. I don't forgive her. I want to be clear about that. But I understand that the justice system measured the difference between her choices and his, and that measurement was accurate. Being honest when it's the hardest thing you've ever done is still a moral act, even if it comes late. Colleen is the part I still wrestle with. She didn't intend for any of this, but she chose again and again to trust her instincts about her brother over the signals her son was sending. She chose to dismiss my concerns as projection. She chose comfort over clarity. I've had to make peace with the fact that intention and impact are 2 separate things, that you can mean no harm and still cause it, and that recognizing that is not optional if you want to do better going forward. What I know for certain is this. The people who came through in this story were the ones who showed up without being asked to. Bryn, standing on that front step for 25 minutes refusing to leave. The constable who, after the first unit's report, listened when I pushed back. The woman in the Edmonton airport who didn't look away. These weren't grand gestures. They were ordinary decency, applied at the right moment. That's what doing right by people actually looks like most of the time. Not heroic, just present. Owen wrote in a school project that the most important thing a person can do is notice when someone can't ask for help out loud and find a way to help them anyway. He was writing about CAS workers. But I think he was also writing from memory. I think he was writing about every adult who looked more carefully, who pushed a little harder, who didn't let it go when it would have been easier to. I try to be that person now. Every day I try.